Welcome to In the Fire, a podcast for the young families of Chapelgate Presbyterian Church. Marriage and parenting are a wonderful blessing and are extremely rewarding, but they're also really hard and can leave us feeling exhausted, overwhelmed, and defeated. That's exactly why we started this podcast, to help families see how the gospel injects encouragement, comfort, and hope into the daily grind of our lives, and to remind you that you're never alone in the struggle. There is another in the fire.
Welcome to In the Fire. I'm your host, Rob Gicking, and I'm really excited because this is our first ever episode, and I'm joined today by one of our amazing pastors at Chapelgate, Patrick Allen. Patrick, say hi.
Hi.
Patrick, I just really, before we even dive into what you do at church and a little bit about yourself, I just got to ask, how are you handling the pressure of this moment? I mean, you're the first guest on a brand new podcast, and it's going to have at least 6 listeners. And I'm just curious, what is the pressure doing for you right now?
Yeah, I'm just kind of trying to rise to the level that needs to be risen to, I guess. I've never done a podcast, so this is new to me too, and I'm just excited to join you in conversation. We've had a lot of informal conversations, and so this is kind of cool to get to dialogue and spit back and forth, in ministry. So I'm thankful and excited to be a part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Patrick hit on it. One of the prime motivations for even doing a podcast really is it's the anecdotal conversation that Patrick and I get to have. These conversations. Working in ministry provides us a job that really has the time to kind of dive into some of these topics. And so that's really what we're trying to do here today. Is we're not trying to give you guys a list of to-dos or self-improvement, even just honestly just to have a pretty frank conversation about the topic at hand, and that's busyness. And so we're hoping today that as we talk about this, I don't know what you want to call it, a pandemic, an epidemic of busyness, that we would be able to sort of process some of that and see the ways that the gospel really impacts and addresses that. And so we're going to really be looking to discuss 4 key points. 1, what makes us so busy? 2, how to know if we are too busy and what the cost of that busy life is. 3, how the gospel frees us from the bondage of busyness. And 4, 1 or 2 practical ways that we can begin to de-hurry or unhurry our lives. So Patrick, before we jump into that, just tell us a little bit about what your role is at Chapelgate, and what makes you excited to talk about this topic.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. So I do a lot of different things at Chapelgate. I work with all of our groups. I lead our discipling movement. I oversee global missions and domestic missions. I work with our college students. I work with our men. So I sort of dabble in a lot of different areas in ministry. Some people call that like you're a generalist, right, in some ways. So I think that would be the appropriate name for what I do.
Yeah. And so in that role, obviously you're spending a lot of time with the people of our church. And how would you describe our people in terms of their relationship to busyness, being in Howard County, Maryland, and I guess a little bit in Carroll County and surrounding areas, but specifically at Chapelgate? Talk to me about our congregation and busyness.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, Howard County is a typical suburban community, but it's a high achieving community where folks that I've encountered and talked with a lot of times have multiple degrees in different specialties and fields. And, to do that means that you're probably in a position that has a lot of performance and requirements for being there. And so folks are just generally busy. Even to a certain extent, like the sporting community in Howard County is reflective of that.
Like youth sports?
Youth sports, yeah. It's like been professionalized in many ways, right, where, kids go to specialty training for this and that, and it's just a reflection of the broader culture. But we're not that distinct from other communities around the country in similar demographics. So
specifically thinking about our young families, we tend to have, right, tends to be 2 working parents, right, full-time jobs, and tends to be highly driven, ambitious, yep, career achievement-oriented people. And what that does is it just kind of puts a lot of emphasis into like filling our calendar with achievement oriented things. Is that how you would describe it?
Yeah, I would say for sure there's definitely a desire to achieve, and that you see that even in the school system with the, I remember going to one high school in Howard County's graduation, and it was, I come from more of a blue collar kind of poorer, lower middle class community, and typically we started, I think, in high school with like a class of like 500 eighth graders, because we had 5 years of high school, and by the time I graduated it was down to like 250 or 300, and lots of various reasons for that. But at this high school graduation in Howard County, like every single kid graduated and every single kid was going to college. There wasn't a military kid, there wasn't a trade school kid.
Interesting.
It was just stark to me, how like ingrained that is even in our young people, to perform, and that translates even into adults. It's very expensive to live in Maryland. I don't know if you knew.
Right. Yeah. Newsflash, everybody. Yeah.
And there's a lot of great resources, but it's not cheap in terms of cost of living. And, so you have to have two working income families. My family, my wife works 2.5 days a week, and, and that's just there. That's just part of it.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, even hearing a little bit of your backstory. Like, I've grown up here. I've lived here my whole life. I've never been more than an hour away from where Chapelgate is there in Marysville. And so for me, this is normal. And in fact, it's not just normal. It's the prototypical way to go about things. And it really wasn't until, honestly, like 2 months ago when I went with the seminary over to Athens and I saw that people live differently in other places. It's not... I remember waking up, don't judge me, I was waking up at like 6:30 because I was ready to go get a coffee, and none of the coffee shops are open until like 8.
Oh, right.
It was just blowing my mind
that
there was a place on earth that had all the amenities we have, but wasn't like as hurried,
I think, like, I've heard it anecdotally said that, like, the East Coast, there's a mentality of work. Like, do I work to live or do I live to work?
Right.
And the way I've understood is people on the East Coast tend to live to work. Whereas like people on the West Coast, I have friends that are like church pastors there, they work to live. So like their weekends are filled with like, I'm going to Yosemite and I'm going to go hiking, or we're going skiing in such and such place. And, people may attend church like maybe once a month. And so what does it mean to be a community in that sort of environment? And here, I think there's a mentality of work, and I'm not saying this is bad, it just is.
Right.
Of I work to live, or I live to work. That's what I mean to say.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. It really is just an interesting thing to chew on. I was looking at some statistics, and obviously you can find a whole bunch of data out there, but some of this really was very interesting to me. I thought I might share it here. It says that the average male spends 10,000 hours on video games by age 21.
That's true.
And so that would be either 1.3 hours a day, starting at the day he was born. So like my son Alex at 7 months, he's now 7 months behind of 1.3 hours a day of video games. Or it's almost 3 hours a day from the age of 10 to 21, which really, like, on one hand we might say like, oh, that's like not a very busy way to live life. That's almost like you're spending a lot of time like in leisure or in comfort, and yet it's part of what keeps us busy, right? Like you're already bringing out that there's multiple things that our families are dealing with. They are dealing with career. They are dealing with living in an expensive area, which is going to push them to be busy on their income, right? I mean, you need to make money to live here in a lot of ways, and you've got the sports dynamic. You're raising kids, they have obligations, they have things, and you don't want to fall behind because that could impact their college. And yes, I'm talking about my 3-year-old, right? Like, we just get all spun up on these things we have to do, and then there's the other side of sometimes I'm busy doing things that just sort of take up time, like social media.
Yeah. I mean, we fill that void in a multitude of different ways. What do we do to distract ourselves? And that's a great, like, a discussion altogether. Like, why do we spend, I played video games. Like, you're sitting here right in my, like, living room, right next to my Xbox, right? And, when I was a kid, I would go, my parents, had a TV in my room, a little, color TV with like, antennas and all this different stuff. And I hooked my Sega Genesis up in there, and I would literally disconnect from the world for hours at a time, getting lost in video games. And for me, I'm only speaking personally, it was an escape.
Right.
It was an escape from just all that was going on in my home life and just, the brokenness that was there. And it was a way that I could sort of deal with all of those feelings that I didn't have a language to name.
Right.
And for good or for better or for worse. Now, video games are not what they were then, and not everybody's doing it for those reasons. But I know that for many, it's a hobby, and that they transact in, because games today are so much different than what they were in the late 80s, early 90s. They're just so much more immersive. There's so much more
no kidding.
stuff. So
yeah, that's great. I mean, I love that you even brought up the escaping, because I think there is a sense in which I'm exhausted from my day oftentimes, and maybe because I am so busy, right? Because I'm working 8 to 10 hours a day, and then I'm also maybe spending time at the gym, and I'm raising a family. My quote unquote me time, my recharge time is so it's either chopped up into tiny like 20-minute pieces, or it's like by the time I get to that hour after the kids are in bed, I'm just so tired. It's the easiest thing to do is to scroll through my phone. The easiest thing to do is to turn on the TV.
There's a term for that now. Do you know it's like death scroll or something like that? Is like or doom scrolling. Like you're just lost in it. I didn't know that was named something until this past weekend, and we were all sort of doing that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So apparently, now I'll use this phrase, death scroll or doom scroll. Americans spend 2 hours a day on social media and 7.5 hours a day on television.
7.5 hours a day?
Right, which to me must mean either nobody sleeps or the TV's on in the background all day. I just don't see how anybody could possibly watch 7.5 hours a day of television and work. But data's what is it? 80% of the time it's
80% of the time it's right every time.
Right, exactly.
Right.
So I guess then it just seems like everybody's busy. But how do I know if I'm overly busy? Like, what's a good metric that I can use, or that our young families might be able to use, that might shed light into whether or not they're too much a part of this busy epidemic?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, part of the gospel invites us to reflect in ourselves, and it's healthy to take an inventory of like your heart and your time. And like, we talk about college students, we talk about time management, and I think there is this in one sense, and I don't say this for everyone because I don't know everyone, but there's a pride we take in, I'm busy.
Right.
It's like,
that's interesting.
So, I don't have time. And, the truth is like we all have margin at different places. It's just how we choose to, everybody has the same 24 hours in a day. And so how do we choose to do that? And like, and what does that look like? And so maybe taking an inventory of like your day could be helpful in discerning that. And where are you, trying to meet some standard or perform in an area, and what are the limits that you naturally have, right? You might be in a season where you can't work out every day. Right. And it would be unhealthy to work out every day. You might be in a season where, you need, to take, because your work is very intense. You need to have margin for rest and rejuvenation. And, we both read John Mark Comer's book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, which was like, the title kind of got me.
Right, yeah, catchy.
It's kind of like, okay, well, let's talk about that. And he's got like a really great like sort of diagnostic, I think, for understanding it. And some of it, like, I checked off 100%. Like, one of them is, like, irritability. When I'm hurried, my kids know that I'm irritable. They see it. They're like, Dad, did you get enough sleep last night? It literally is a question that they ask me. And I have to repent. I have to go, recognize that maybe I spent too much time death scrolling or working or, whatever it was. And I wasn't rested and rejuvenated, to be present. with them.
Yeah, let's go back just a minute, because you said something a few sentences ago that I thought was really interesting, and we didn't really talk about it in the what's making us so busy. But that phrase you said of like, there's almost a pressure to be busy.
Yeah.
Right? Like we all know when you ask somebody like, hey, how you doing? Or like, how's life been? Like, what's the answer? Busy, you know? Mm-hmm. And at the same time I go, maybe even a metric here is to ask myself, am I uncomfortable if the answer is to, hey, how's it going? If I said like, it's going pretty well lately.
Yeah.
You know, like things are going pretty well. Like, am I actually uncomfortable because somehow by not being busy, by not being like stressed, like I'm falling behind? Like, what do you like?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I don't know. Like, I do think that there's a sense in which, like, we don't want to tell people, well, like, it's like the law of going too deep too soon. Like, what if you were to ask somebody that question and they were like, man, life is just really tough right now.
Right.
And they weren't prepared for it in the context of, you know, how you were asking it. Because It's just sort of like, is general. It's not meant to be.
It's a greeting. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, but in one sense, that's not being inauthentic, you know, by saying that things are okay. But, you know, I think sometimes we don't know how to transact that gap between, you know, where we actually are and where we ideally want to be, right. You know, and.
But do you think there's a sense in which I'm taking pride in answering, yeah, I'm really busy. I've just been so busy.
Sometimes, yeah. Because it means that why would I take pride in that? Because it means my work gives me meaning, you know, it gives me purpose and value. You know, I clearly don't have enough time to, you know, deal with whatever the issue that you want.
I don't have time for 7.5 hours of TV a day. Yeah. I'm too busy, right? And that could be work. It could be church even, right? Like, oh, you know, I do so much at church. I'm just too busy for whatever, you know, to watch whatever TV show is popular right now. And we almost take a sense of like, yeah, I'm doing it right. If I'm busy doing these things, and I'm doing it right. And I would actually argue that is very much the status symbol of our area in many ways. Mm. The second you said it, just like my mind like exploded, because I was like, oh, I do that. Like I do that all the time. Like, oh, how have you been? Like, oh, I've been so busy. But like, I might as well just substitute like, I'm really important. Like, because that's what I want you to get from that. Like, hey Patrick, thanks for asking. I'm really important, and you should know that.
Well, yeah, and we do the same thing with our kids too. Like, you know, how are your kids? Well, Johnny's, you know, got a 4.0 and is salutatorian of the school.
Stinking Johnny,
you
such
know,
a genius.
And you know, we transact in the accolades and superlatives,
right? And
that's just like natural. It's like breathing,
right?
You know, but then you strip away that veneer, and you're like, oh yeah, Johnny's struggling with deep depression, you know, and he's not sure who he is or what he believes anymore, you know, and that's where it gets really, I don't know, interesting to me.
It does. Well, thanks for helping clarify that. Let's go back to the Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. It's kind of a mouthful, by John Mark Comer. He's got a pretty interesting, and you mentioned one, irritability, like the 10 symptoms of hurry sickness.
Yeah.
Walk us through those if you can, or at least the ones you think are real important.
Yeah, the ones that like that irritability kind of stuck out to me. Workaholism and non-stack activity. I tend to think that when pressure hits people, they either respond in one of two ways. One, they either get like more driven and like, I'm going to do more. I'm going to pull myself up by the bootstraps more. I'm going to try harder, or they just shut down. And it's like, well, I can't do anymore. And so I'm just going to lock it up. We're going to pack it up, and I'm going to go hide or maybe I don't mean that negatively, but just, you know, we're going to pretend like it didn't happen. So I think workaholism or non-stacked activity could be one. And isolation is the other one. So like, you know, sort of, I need to retreat because my world is just so overwhelming.
Right. So like, I'm so busy, I'm so hurried that it just like it piles up on me almost, and the best thing to do is just kind of like literally shut the world out. Mm-hmm. I stop responding to text messages. Yep. I don't engage with my friends. I blow off like the party that I was supposed to go to because I'm just overwhelmed to the point of needing it.
Yeah, that's right. And there's no like balance between the two. So it's, you know, work isn't bad in and of itself. Work is a pre-fall condition, and wanting to work hard is I think a gospel value, you know, but whether we find our meaning and our purpose in that's a whole different conversation. But yeah, you can either fall off the cliff of like, I'm going to just drill down harder and try harder, or I'm going to isolate and ghost people on my texts and not respond. And,
right.
People wonder, is everything okay?
Yeah.
Those are two that stand out. I mean, restlessness, and escapist behaviors were sort of two. When you try to actually slow down and relax, you give Sabbath a try, but you hate it. You read scripture, but you find it boring. You have a quiet time with God, but can't focus your mind.
Yeah.
Like that sort of restlessness in our spirits and our souls, I think is one symptom.
Yeah,
sure.
I have a friend he's a lot like me. He's up in the Philadelphia region, and he actually has his own real estate business. I mean, he's an absolute, he's a stud. But like one of the things he'll tell you, he's like, I hate when I'm not busy. I have to stay busy. And I just said to him, I was like, why? And he's like, I don't know. I just know this. When I have a free day, I get really, really anxious. And I think that's that sort of restlessness. Am I checking my email on a day off because I happen to find myself at a moment where I wasn't doing something? Maybe I was sitting on the couch and I just instantaneously, like by instinct, I reach for my phone, I check my email. Why? I don't know. I couldn't tell you if you asked me, but I just did it. And there's some longing in my heart, really, that I don't know why I'm trying to find. I don't know why I want there to be an email. I don't know why. It's just, I do.
Yeah, right. And I get I totally get that. It's like a little dopamine hit. Or if you're a 3 on the Enneagram, it's like, man, I've completed that task. It's done. And I get to say I accomplished something, and therefore if I accomplish something, then I have purpose and value. I definitely wrestle with this as somebody that struggles with workaholism. Like just this idea that I need to be physically, emotionally, spiritually, actually present in the moments when with my children.
Yeah.
And instead of thinking about the conversation I need to have, or the email that I need to send, or the experience that I'm not a part of, that maybe God has foreordained and called me to this moment of rest and presence, radical dependence and presence with my kids and my family.
Yeah, and that's a perfect transition point in a sense, because obviously when you have young kids, and that could be or if you don't have kids, you're just married. When you interact in such a connected way with another human being, your schedule is no longer your own. And so, the takeaway from today is not, let me figure out how to be sitting still for 6 hours a day, where I'm not distracted and live some sort of monastic monk, type of life, like a hermit, that's not the goal. But I do think there's a sense in which we sort of need to ask the question, okay, so, let's say, and for you guys online, and listening, we're going to put the full list of 10 in the show notes. So feel free to take a look at that and go through either by yourself or with your spouse, and actually, go through item by item and give yourself a score. Did you score 5 out of 10? Did you score 2 out of 10? Were you like Patrick and Rob, who probably got I got a 7, I think.
Yeah, I was up there. It was pretty high at times.
So obviously we're telling you more as we also struggle with this, this hurriness and busyness syndrome. But okay, so we got our score, and there's a sense in which it's almost reasonable to ask the question so what? Because this is how it is in our area. I'm not going to go be a monk or a hermit. I'm not going to have this Amish lifestyle.
And life isn't going back to pre-technology.
No, not at all. Right. It's going to get faster and faster. And so what I guess the question then becomes, what's the cost of this, either long term or short term, for me, for my family, for my marriage? What's the cost of this continual busy and hurried life?
Well, I think you see the cost playing out in the rising levels of anxiety and depression and stress in our young people, for sure, and the studies that are being done on the consumption of media and sort of passive consuming of it. It's no wonder when you look at those things, that those things are increasingly rising among our young people.
Right.
And that's just there. So what do we do with it? I think you're right. We're not going to go back to a monastic lifestyle, but I think, we have to learn to embrace limitations. I think the pandemic taught us a little bit about that, where people's lives became a little more integrated. The increasing demand to work from home and being able to, be there with your kids and do work-life balance and integrate it. I think people got a foretaste of that, and now it's like, okay, everything's going back, but I kind of want to hold on to that. That was like really helpful, in some ways.
Yeah, some people really seem to their life became a little more balanced.
Yeah.
Right? I wasn't in a car for an hour on the way to work and an hour on the way back. So I got 2 hours back. And because I couldn't see people, it really did become like that when I wasn't working, I was there with my family. I was present. Meanwhile, others, right, all of a sudden, the one boundary between work and life that I had, which was an office building, has been removed.
Yes.
And so, like, everything has infiltrated every part of my life, and I can't even see clearly, like, what's work and what's not anymore. I'm constantly accessible, and it drained him. But, Patrick, I think you're right. And we've talked about this a bunch in other conversations, that there is a cost to this. It's going to cost me time, right? I mean, the concept of opportunity cost. For everything I say yes to, I said no to 1,000 other things. And so if I'm saying yes to this social requirement, or I'm saying yes to this extra opportunity, with work or even with church sometimes, right? Like, and obviously Patrick and I, we work at church. We love when people volunteer and they serve, but when you say yes to serving, there's a no to time with your family. There's a no to time in your neighborhood, getting to know your neighbors and things like that. And so that opportunity cost is real, and it does pile up over time. And if you're someone who is running at this rampant, like, let me go as fast and as hard as I possibly can, it's going to take a toll on you, physically. That's right. Mentally.
Yeah. Spiritually.
Yeah. Spiritually.
You're drifting away. I mean, Jesus embraced limitations, right? Like he embraced like this idea, he was our Sabbath rest, right? But he also had needs. So I think of Jesus and Zacchaeus. He's like, Zacchaeus, I'm coming to your house. I'm going to stay there. Right. The God of the universe who like made the earth and everything in it had needs and was willing to receive those needs to be met by the community that God placed in his path. And that point, it was Zacchaeus. He knew that he was going to stay with them. So how humbling, that even Jesus, took on the limitation of being a man.
Yeah.
Where he could have like snapped his finger, the cross could have been finished. He could have done all of those things, but he embraced that. And I think, we have to embrace those limitations as well. Like, what are the main things that are important, and what are the things that I do, because I enjoy them, and what are the things that I need to do, and sort of reorienting our hearts in the gospel.
Yeah, that's so good. I think of in John when Jesus, John is the I am statements, and Jesus gets the I'm the good shepherd, and I'm the gate of the sheep, and he says, I have come that they may have life and have it abundantly. And I think when we're slaves to our calendar, that's not abundance. I mean, we have an abundance of stress, we have an abundance of hurried and busyness and things to do, but that's not abundant life. I think, having the freedom to live in light of my limitations, like you're saying, that's what the gospel offers me. It offers me the ability to see that my limitations are not just a hindrance, right? But with the gospel, I can look at my limitations as a blessing from God.
Yeah.
Something that causes me to slow down, be present with him, see him, and not just whatever is next. And so, like, whether that's, your physical limitations, right? Like maybe, like
you go to the doctor and all of a sudden he's like, you have an irregular heartbeat, right? And you need to make some changes in your life. You're going to go home and like adjust all of those different things. You might change your diet. You might change like your sleep routine. You might change some things at work, whatever. Like you're going to, and that's what we need to do kind of spiritually at some level, like, is like, okay, where's my heart?
Right.
Am I growing? Am I enjoying the gospel? Do I find joy in my salvation? Do I find peace and meaning and purpose? And not so much like I need to do like, something to, but just more like I need to ask or, sit with that. I don't,
Yeah, I mean that's a perfect example, right? In that situation, I now see like I'm forced to slow down and recognize my own frailty.
Yeah.
I'm forced to slow down and recognize my own need and dependence, and that's exactly where the gospel wants us to be, right? Like Jesus doesn't say, "Come to me, all those who are weary and burdened, and I'll reprioritize your schedules to get you more efficient."
Yeah, that's right. That's right. We don't like need, though. We don't like to feel needy. We've been taught, from a very early age that neediness equals weakness. If I have a need, and not like explicitly, but you see it in the messages, like in our culture, Home Depot, you can do it and we can help. Right. That self-sufficiency, that radical independence, like that stream just runs deep into who we are as Americans. And what the gospel invites us to is radical dependence on Christ and his work on our behalf. For every arena and area of our lives.
Yeah, and nowhere is that more clearly put on display, right, than Martha and Mary.
Right.
Martha, Mary is sitting at the feet of Jesus, right? She recognizes her need. She recognizes the gift of his presence and his interest in his teaching, and she's sitting there. And Martha's in the kitchen. She's trying to cook this huge meal and host all these people that are clearly going to be coming into her house because they want to hear Jesus. And she just misses it, right? She goes to Jesus. She's like, "Hey, tell my sister that she needs to stop sitting around and get busy like me." And Jesus, I mean, guys, if you think Jesus is always like, kind of like tender, like around the bush,
giving you all the feels.
Yeah, he just looks this lady straight in the face. "Martha, Martha, you are busy and anxious about many things. Your sister has chosen the better portion."
Yeah.
But how many times do I look at the things that are going to stop me, limit me, and instead go like, "Oh, that's so annoying. Like, I got to find a way to push through that," instead of going, "Oh man, here I am in my need, and this is an opportunity to sit like Mary at the feet of Jesus."
Yeah. I think the pandemic gave us a taste of that for sure.
Yeah.
Give us a taste of that sort of forced Sabbath.
Yeah. So as we come to a close then, I mean, what are 1 to 2 practical ways that our young families can begin to de-hurry, unhurry their lives and live in that freedom? Live in the freedom that says, I don't have to do everything. I am able to. I'm free to sit at the feet of Jesus. So what are 1 or 2 ways we could do that?
I mean, I think resting in our union with Christ is one thing. Like understanding, finding those areas where maybe we've been trying to perform in our lives spiritually.
Sure.
And seeking to yield and surrender those things to God. I think that's a starting place. Like I think we have to look at our spiritual lives and take an inventory of that and just say, where's my heart? Do I have a love for my neighbor? And if I don't, why? Am I growing in desire to see my workplace become a place where God would use me? And if I don't have that desire, what's that all about? Do I want to be, an inclusive community and start to ask those kinds of heart questions, to kind of get to it. I mean, I wish there was like one magic bullet, but there probably, I think Sabbathing and taking a rest, like putting the phone down, for a day or a period of day. And, that maybe those are some good principles, but I don't know. I don't know. I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, I think one of the things that Kate and I have done that's made a big impact for us is Sabbath. And, obviously when we say Sabbath, that's like an Old Testament word. It's, the 10 Commandments. And, we could have a whole episode about Sabbath in terms of the theological side of that. But I think for us, we've done some things that have just been helpful. They're helpful, practical things. We put our phones on silent and we actually put them in a drawer so that we don't see them. And I'll tell you, nothing reveals how like desperate you are for your phone more than like doing that for 10 minutes and realizing I've touched my pocket 3 times.
Yeah,
like,
right.
It's really sad.
It's like I got the shakes.
Right, yeah. Yeah, like I'm sweating and shaking,
Yeah.
I'm having withdrawal. And so we do that, and on Sunday, we try to do things and there's nothing magic about Sunday other than that's the day of worship, right? We gather, but we'll try to spend time just as a family. It's okay if that day is a little bit on the boring side, if we're not filled to the brim with fun activities for the kids. If today is more of a day where we enjoyed being at home, going for a walk, eating meals together, things like that. I think John Mark Comer in his book that we referenced earlier, like they bake this big cookie pie and dump a whole like gallon of vanilla ice cream on it and just eat out of it like crazy people.
I heard that. I read that and I was like, ooh.
Right. Yeah. So that sounds good to me. I'm working on Kate, trying to convince her that we should do that too. And then I think the last one is journaling. Yeah. Whether it's in the morning or at night or whenever you have time for it, but just even like as you said, sitting and kind of reflecting on where's my heart at. I think for me, journaling has been one of the most efficient, like effective ways to do that because nobody else is going to read this. Yeah. Nobody else is ever going to know. It's just me and God, and I literally write it almost like I'm verbally processing to Him. And in many ways, that's what prayer is, right? Like, God, here's everything that's going on in my mind and my heart. Show me the ways that I'm trying to earn your grace or earn your love. Show me the ways that busyness is actually a way for me to feel good about myself, and help me to stop. Yeah. Help me to live in the accomplished work of Jesus rather than the performative work of Rob. And
sometimes so two things that you said really struck a chord. Well, one is like maybe it is your thoughts and your mind's racing and you just need to get those things out. Right. And journaling is a great way to sort of get those thoughts that you've been having on a situation at work and bring those to the Father. The other thing is like leading yourself to a deeper level of repentance, because here's the reality. We're all gonna fall short of whatever God's standard is, but the beauty of our union with Christ is that we can come every day in repentance and know that God sees us through Jesus, and that's true every single day.
Every single day. Yeah, Patrick, thank you so much for your time. I know you're a busy guy, but taking some time to love on our young families. Very greatly appreciated. So thank you so much.
No, I appreciate it, man. All those young families out there, I get it. Been there. Yeah. It's wild, but it's anecdotal, but it goes like a minute. It's going in like a minute.
Yeah. Busy times, but fruitful times as well.
They are. Yeah.
Well, this is obviously the part of the podcast where I'm supposed to say something like, make sure you follow us on Instagram or whatever, but that's not why we're doing this. It's not about Patrick. It's not about Rob. This is really about Jesus and the way that He changes lives. He forgives sinners and offers comfort, healing, renewal, and peace to every single one of us. And we hope and pray that that's exactly what's happened here today through this podcast, that you had a fresh interaction with Jesus Christ, really through the lived testimony of Patrick, the lived testimony of Rob and our own struggle with, needing to prove that we're good enough, sometimes even through busyness. And we hope that you heard in various ways that Jesus is a God who says, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, hurried and busy, and I'll give you rest." So if you want to learn more about this topic or Chapelgate, check out our show notes for some resources, or simply reach out. Patrick and I would love to talk to you. And keep an eye out for more episodes. We'll try to release an episode every week. But in the meantime, remember this: God loves you and He is with you. He will never leave you or forsake you, and that means you're never alone. There is another in the fire. Thanks for listening.